The silver tray was still trembling. Nobody in the room noticed it at first. The dining room at Sardi's on West 44th Street was loud that evening in March 1954. The clink of crystal, the low thunder of industry voices, the particular music of a Manhattan restaurant where everyone at every table believed they were the most important person in the room. Deals were being closed. Careers were being made and ended over the salad course. It was the kind of place where the waitstaff learned very quickly to become invisible. She was good at invisible. The young woman in the white uniform moved through the crowded dining room the way water moves around stone, efficient, quiet, present without being seen. Dark hair pinned back, tray level, eyes on the table ahead. She had been doing this for 4 years, and she had learned that the secret to surviving in a room like this was to look at nothing directly. You set down the glass, you murmured the pleasantries, you disappeared. You did not linger. You did not make eye contact. She made eye contact. It happened the way accidents always happen, in the space between one breath and the next, in a moment so small it should not have mattered. She had reached the corner table, the one slightly set apart from the others, and she extended the tray toward the woman seated there. The woman in black. The woman who had been laughing at something her companion said, head tilted back, that particular laugh, bright and unguarded and slightly too loud for the room. And then the laugh stopped. The woman looked up, and the tray trembled. For a moment, no one moved. The conversation at the table died mid-sentence. The agent sitting across from her set down his menu. The woman in black was not looking at her menu. She was not looking at her companion. She was looking at the waitress with an expression that did not belong in a place like this, something too raw, too unguarded, cracked open from somewhere deep and private. It was not the look of a famous woman recognizing a nobody. It was the look of someone who had just seen a ghost they had spent 9 years trying to find. The woman in black was 24 years old. She had just won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Her name was on marquees from New York to London to Rome, and in that moment, with the whole gilded room buzzing indifferently around her, she whispered a single word, a name, Clara? The silver tray trembled in the waitress's hands. Around them, the restaurant continued its indifferent roar, but at that corner table, something had just stopped time. Stay with me, because what Audrey Hepburn did next, nobody in that room saw coming, and nobody who was there ever forgot it. But that moment didn't start there. To understand what happened at that corner table in March 1954, you have to go back 10 years. Back to a winter so cold the canals froze, and the silence outside was not peaceful. It was the silence of a city holding its breath under occupation. Back to 2 girls, 14 years old, hiding together in the dark. The Netherlands, 1944. The village of Velp outside Arnhem. Winter had come early that year, and it had come without mercy. The canals had frozen solid by November. The trees stood stripped and black against a sky the color of ash. There was no coal, no bread, no certainty that the person you spoke to at breakfast would still be there by evening. The German occupation had entered its 5th year, and the people of Velp had learned to measure everything, food, words, trust, in the smallest possible portions. Audrey Kathleen Rustin was 14 years old, and she was hungry. Not the hunger of a missed meal or a skipped lunch, the deep structural hunger of a body consuming itself, the hunger that made your vision swim when you stood up too fast and made sleep feel like the only place left where the world still made sense. Her family had been reduced to eating tulip bulbs boiled into a gray paste. She had stopped growing. Her ankles had begun to swell. She did not talk about the fear. You did not talk about the fear. Talking about it gave it more room. It was behind the old Reformed church on Kirkstraat on a frozen afternoon in January that she first met Clara Voss. Audrey had slipped away from her mother for an hour. She needed air. She needed 20 minutes of not being watched. And she had sat down on the stone step at the back of the church and simply begun to cry. Not dramatically, not loudly, the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who has run out of the energy to hold it in. Clara Voss was the daughter of a Dutch schoolteacher. She was 14 as well, dark-haired, serious-faced, with the particular stillness of a child who had learned very early that the world did not reward noise. She came around the corner of the church carrying a small bundle of firewood and stopped when she saw Audrey. She looked at her for a moment. Then she set down the firewood, sat down on the step beside her, and said nothing. She stayed for 2 hours. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not offer solutions or comfort or false promises. She simply stayed. That was Clara. She gave you her presence the way some people gave you money, completely without keeping score. By the time liberation came in May 1945, the two girls were inseparable, which made what happened next almost impossible to survive. Liberation did not arrive the way people imagined it would. It came in pieces. First, the distant rumble of Allied tanks, then the flags appearing in windows overnight, then the noise, the extraordinary, disorienting noise of people who had been silent for 5 years, suddenly allowed to be loud again. The streets of Velp filled with strangers, with soldiers, with families searching for families, with the particular chaos of a world trying to reassemble itself from broken parts. It was joyful and terrifying in equal measure, and in that chaos, people got separated. Clara's family was gone within a week. Her father had died during the occupation, pneumonia, the winter of 1943, without a doctor because the doctors had other priorities. Her mother had a sister in Amsterdam. There were arrangements made, addresses exchanged, promises spoken in the middle of a crowd. Audrey's mother was already planning their own departure. There was a letter sent to Clara's address 3 weeks later, then another, then a third. All 3 came back unopened. The family had moved. No forwarding address. Audrey carried that silence with her through every audition, every early stage role, every step of the long climb toward the life that was quietly assembling itself around her. She mentioned Clara to almost no one, not because she had forgotten, precisely because she hadn't. Some absences are too heavy to keep explaining to people who weren't there. Clara Voss arrived at Ellis Island in September 1948 with her mother, her younger brother Willem, $43, and a suitcase held closed with a leather belt. Her English was functional but fragile. The immigration officer mispronounced their name and wrote it wrong in the ledger, and Clara did not correct him because she had already learned that in a new country, the first lesson was which battles to save your energy for. They settled in a rooming house in Queens. Clara took work immediately, a textile factory on Northern Boulevard, then a laundry on Junction Avenue, then, finally, a position serving tables at Sardi's on West 44th Street, where the tips were better and the work was steady, and the rule was simple. Be invisible, be efficient, be gone before anyone remembers your name. She was good at the rule. She had been practicing it since 1945. In the spring of 1953, she saw Audrey's face on the cover of a magazine at a newsstand on 47th Street. She stood there holding it for a full minute. Then she put it back and walked away. That was not her world anymore. She had made peace with that. But stay with me, because peace, it turns out, is a door, and some doors don't stay closed. Keep watching. Clara had known the name on the reservation list since the pre-shift briefing at 4 o'clock. She had seen it written in the manager's careful handwriting on the white card clipped to the podium. Party of 4. Corner table. A. Hepburn. She had stood there reading it for long enough that the busboy beside her asked if something was wrong. She said no. She said she was fine. She raised her hand halfway to ask the manager to reassign her to a different table. She put her hand back down. She told herself it was a common enough name. She told herself that the woman who had once sat beside her on a frozen church step in Velp belonged to a different universe now, a universe of Academy Awards and Roman holiday and photographers outside restaurants like this one, not inside them. She told herself that she was a professional, that she had survived harder things than carrying a water glass to a famous woman's table, and that in 20 minutes it would be over and she would not have made a fool of herself. She picked up the silver tray. She walked toward the corner table. She kept her eyes on the glasses. The woman in black was laughing at something. That laugh, open and slightly too loud, the laugh of someone who never quite learned to make herself smaller in a room. And Clara reached the table and extended the tray and began to set the first glass down and told herself, "Do not look up. Do not look up. Do not." The woman looked up, and 9 years collapsed in a single second. It was the eyes. It was always the eyes. The same dark, particular stillness that had appeared around the corner of a church in January 1944 and sat down without a word and stayed for 2 hours without asking for anything in return. Older now, luminous in a way that photographs almost captured but didn't. But underneath the fame and the elegance and the careful architecture of a movie star's public face, the same girl. Unmistakably, impossibly the same girl. Clara? The tray trembled. Clara's knuckles went white around the edge of it. The table had gone completely silent. The agent, the executives, the half-finished sentences, all of it suspended, waiting. Audrey rose from her chair. Slowly. The way you move when you're afraid the moment will shatter. She reached across the table and took Clara's free hand in both of hers, and then she said 4 words that made every person within earshot forget entirely where they were. "I looked for you." Not a greeting, not the careful, polished language of a woman who had learned to perform every public moment with precision. Just 4 words, spoken quietly, directly, with the particular weight of something that had been carried a very long time and was finally being set down. Clara did not move. The tray was still in her hand. The water glass was still on it, untouched. Around them the restaurant continued its noise, the crystal, the laughter, the industry voices. But at the corner table there was a circle of absolute stillness. The way stillness forms around things that are too important for ordinary sound. "I wrote letters," Audrey continued. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. 3 of them. They all came back. I didn't know where you had gone. Clara's professional mask, the one she had constructed across 6 years of American survival, brick by careful brick, cracked straight down the middle. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way ice cracks in spring, a sound so small you almost miss it, and then suddenly everything is moving. She answered in Dutch, a reflex, the language of 1944, the language of frozen church steps and shared tulip rations and 2 hours of wordless company in the dark. "Ik wist niet dat je zou zoeken." I didn't know you would look. Audrey answered without hesitating, in the same language, in the same quiet voice. "Ik zou altijd zoeken." I would always look. The room was completely frozen. A busboy had stopped in the kitchen doorway. The maitre d' stood 6 feet away and had not moved in 30 seconds. At the surrounding tables, forks had been set down with the particular care of people trying not to make any sound that might break something precious. The agent leaned slowly toward the studio executive beside him and whispered, "Who is that?" The executive shook his head. "I have no idea." Audrey turned to her table, not unkindly, but with a quiet finality that left no room for negotiation, and said, "Gentlemen, would you excuse us? I've just found someone I have been looking for since 1945. She did not wait for their answer. She pulled out the empty chair beside her and looked at Clara. The silver tray was gently lifted from Clara's hands by a passing colleague who had read the room with perfect instinct. "Sit down," Audrey said. "Please, you are not serving this table tonight." But what Audrey did after that conversation ended, the part that never made the papers, the part that changed Clara's life completely, that's what history almost forgot. Stay with me. They talked for 2 hours. The restaurant moved around them like water around two stones, tables turning, glasses refilling, the slow tide of a Manhattan dinner service ebbing toward closing time. Nobody interrupted them. The maitre d', a 20-year veteran of Sardi's named Raymond, who had seen every variety of human behavior a famous room could produce, later said it was the most unusual thing he had witnessed in 2 decades behind that podium. Not because it was loud, because it was the opposite of loud. 2 women at a corner table, leaning toward each other, speaking in voices too low to hear, and the quality of attention between them so complete and so private that the entire room seemed to understand instinctively that it was not welcome there. Clara told her story the way she had learned to tell hard things, plainly, without decoration, without self-pity. Ellis Island, Queens, the factory, the laundry, the 4 years at Sardi's. She told it as a series of facts, the way you describe a road you have already walked, because the walking is finished and the facts are all that remain. Audrey listened the way people who have known real hunger listen, with her whole body, without interrupting, without filling the silences with the small, consoling noises that people use when they are more comfortable with the sound of their own voice than with another person's truth. When Clara finished, Audrey was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You gave me your wool socks, the winter of 1944. You took them off and handed them to me and told me they were too big for you anyway." Clara looked at her. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything," Audrey said. There was a silence between them then that was not empty. It was the silence of 2 people who have just confirmed something they were both afraid to believe, that the years and the distance and the ocean between them had not, in fact, erased anything that mattered. When the manager approached, cautious and apologetic, Audrey looked up with that quiet authority that would come to define her entire public life and said, "Please put whatever she has missed tonight on my account and bring us 2 coffees." The manager nodded and retreated without another word. Then Audrey reached into her purse and removed a small card, her personal contact, written by hand, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward Clara. "You are not doing this alone anymore," she said. "I mean that, not as a gesture, as a fact." Clara Voss never became famous. Her name appears in no film credits, no Hollywood columns, no archived issues of Variety or The Hollywood Reporter. She did not attend premieres or pose for photographers or move through the world in the particular way that famous people move, as though the air itself has been arranged in advance for their arrival. She was a woman who carried trays and later carried books and later carried the particular quiet authority of a person who has been genuinely known by someone extraordinary and understood, at the deepest level, that that was enough. In the weeks that followed the night at Sardi's, Audrey made 1 phone call, then another. She spoke to no journalists, she issued no statements, she did not bring photographers or publicists or the careful machinery of a celebrity doing a visible good deed. She simply made the calls, and then she wrote a letter, and then she waited. Clara received a scholarship to Barnard College in the spring of 1954, full tuition, anonymous donor. She suspected immediately and said nothing, because she had learned, from a frozen church step in 1944, from 2 hours of wordless company in the dark, that some gifts are given in silence on purpose, and that the correct response to that kind of giving is to receive it with the same grace it was offered. She earned her degree in 4 years. She taught English literature in a New York public school for 31 years after that. Her students remembered her as someone who listened the way very few people listen, completely, without waiting for her turn to speak. Some lessons travel in the blood. Some lessons travel through wool socks, handed over on a frozen morning without asking for anything in return. Audrey Hepburn spent the second half of her life becoming something larger than a movie star, a UNICEF ambassador, a woman who traveled to famine zones in Ethiopia and Somalia in her 60s because, she said simply, she remembered what hunger felt like from the inside. People always asked where that capacity for compassion came from. The answer, when she gave it, was always the same. The people who were kind to me when kindness cost them something. I have never forgotten them. I never will. She never said the name Clara in any interview. She didn't need to. Some friendships are not for the public. Some things you keep because they are too real for the world to handle without diminishing them. A silver tray trembling in a crowded room. 4 words spoken across 9 years of silence. I would always look. That is the thing about genuine loyalty. It does not require an audience. It finds you anyway. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, because every week we bring you the stories that history almost forgot, the ones that actually mattered, the ones that still do.